Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new show on Gamers Plus. It's a little bit of an experimental one, but I'm already feeling really good about this, in which myself and Ailert are going to be discussing games that both of us played and previously wrote about for Gamers' Prime Channel. Ailert, what game are we going to be discussing today?
It's a game that we actually touched upon recently called Spec Ops: The Line, a very divisive yet, I believe, entertaining experience for most people that touched upon. So I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. For those of you who may have just stumbled here randomly and who did not watch our Spec Ops: The Line documentary on our Prime channel, first off, shame on you. You need to go and watch that right now. But secondly, so I figured I'd catch you up to speed on what it is. Basically, as Ailert said, it's a third-person shooter. Released in 2012, it was developed by German game studio Yager Development, and it was published by 2K Games. And there were a lot of people, from 2K Games, sort of head offices, who helped out a lot in its development, including one of its main writers, Walt Williams, who I'd imagine will come up a few times in the discussion we're going to have. And the thing about the game is that it's actually a continuation of a series that previously existed and was active in like the early 2000s. And I figured I already know the answer, but I want to ask, do you have any experience with any of the Spec Ops games before The Line?
No. I'm completely unfamiliar with them. Even when I played the game, or when I was looking for footage, and I saw the games, I was like, man, this seems like a really tough game to get into. It's like all these very specific military things that were even too specific for the average military shooter fan. So, how about you?
Yeah, I don't have any experience with it either.
Yeah.
So like when I was researching this game, by happenstance, I'd happened to pick up a book called Significant Zero, which was written by Walt Williams a couple of years back. And there's a section of the book in which he talks about working on Spec Ops: The Line. And there's a specific part where he brings up the prior Spec Ops games, and he's like, so yeah, the series used to exist in the past. It did not review very well, and I suspect that the reason it didn't review very well is because they tried to jam like 6 games into 2 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is true, by the way. They basically released a whole litany of them at once, and then it kind of just stopped.
Pretty crazy, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when did you first play Spec Ops: The Line?
So my tale with Spec Ops: The Line goes all the way back to the first reveal trailer. Actually, I remember being just enamored with how the game was presented, and yet the sand gameplay mechanic, which was
right.
I found so cool in the trailers. So I wasn't really aware of the hellish torture of an experience that was awaiting me. And once I got into the game, which was on I think a week after the release date, I was quite surprised actually. I was just getting it, or I just purchased the game to have this just a fun shooter experience with like fun gameplay mechanics, but I didn't realize that it was going to be such a different story. So I was quite surprised. How about you though? Did you also or did you just play the game for the video?
I played the game a couple of years beforehand.
Right.
I came into it a little bit more prepared. I originally heard about it listening to Podcast Beyond, which is IGN's PlayStation podcast. The two co-hosts of that podcast basically really championed it when it came out in 2012. And just from hearing them describe it, I already kind of knew that I was in for a very different shooter experience going into it. But I actually did not play it in 2012. So I just, while we were talking, I brought up my PlayStation profiles page so I could look at all the trophies, because I played it on PlayStation 3, and so I got trophies for playing through it. Mm-hmm. And I played it apparently in June of 2017 for the first time.
I see.
I think it's possible I might have purchased it a few years beforehand, and then I just only got around to it in 2017. Yeah, even being prepared for what I was into, it was, I mean, yeah, as you've described, it's a pretty grisly experience, and there were definitely a few moments in it that kind of took me off guard.
Yeah, but you were like completely unprepared, right? Aside from the podcast that you mentioned earlier, did you actually know about the big twist that was coming, or no?
I wasn't like, I was not directly spoiled to anything, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I read like an article online at some point that was like, 5 shooters that are really crazy or 5 shooters that are insane, and I might have like, the article in question didn't it didn't like tease or reveal exactly what was going on in the game, but it did show like, oh, there's a part where there's a tree and the tree decomposes in real time, and it shows that your main character is insane. So I knew that there was some screwy stuff going on, but I didn't know like the actual exact nature of some of the like game reveals.
Well, like I mentioned, for me, it was very much a similar experience. I was very much surprised by that, so pretty cool.
Quick question: did you just play it on normal difficulty?
For the first time, I always play the games on like the normal difficulty, but I don't feel like playing it on any other difficulty than normal would have substantially made the or differentiated the gameplay experience in the end. I feel like normal's a pretty good way to experience the game.
Yeah, I played it on normal, although the reason why I bring up the question is because I'm still looking at the trophies that I purchased for the game, and I was reminded of the fact that to get the Platinum trophy for the game, which on PlayStation just means you've gotten all the other trophies or achievements in the game, you need to play it on basically the highest difficulty in the game, which is Foobar difficulty. And I just remember getting into Foobar difficulty and getting my ass kicked, and it was a sad moment because up until that point I was actually on a streak of like platinuming every game that I came across, and with that game was just like, nah, I want to platinum this, but I think I'm just gonna leave it be.
Oh wow, so Spec Ops The Line is the one that got away, huh?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of other games that got away. It wasn't just Spec Ops.
I see. No, I've never tried an Foobar, but does it alter the gameplay experience in any substantial way other than just making bullets more damaging, or?
From what I recall, no. It was like, honestly, it was exactly what you're describing, where I was trying to run down a corridor and an enemy would it would open fire on me and I would just instantly die, and that would be it. And I'd be like, well. And I recall also, like, one of the problems is that, of course, you're controlling a squad in the game. And I recall, like, just finding the squad less easy to control. Well, I mean, it was no more or less easy to control on, some of the other earlier difficulties of the game. But on this difficulty, not having as much control of them became a real big issue in a way that it wasn't on the easier difficulties. So, yeah, it wasn't working out.
Definitely. Yeah, it could have borrowed more from Republic Commando in that regard, instead of only just having your companions be able to shoot at something or very basic squad commands. So it would have been cool to direct their cover and that sort of stuff, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not so like to get into like, our overall impressions of it, and we should mention, by the way, we are going to go into spoilers. If you were hoping not to get spoiled on Spec Ops, you should probably tune off right now and be sure to save this video and listen to it later. Yeah, I mean, it's not like a fantastic third-person shooter.
Nah.
There are definitely much stronger games that came out around the same time as it, but it's perfectly functional for what it needs to do, basically, if that makes sense. Or at least that's how I feel. Do you feel differently?
It delivers the message very well, and I feel like there are some interesting perspectives on the gameplay where Spec Ops The Line kind of takes players for a loop in that the people who make this argument are saying that the gameplay is intentionally generic, so that when you get further into the game, you get surprised by how not generic of a story this actually is. So their argument is that the generic gameplay is actually working towards that surprise moment. And I do not really know if that's the case for me. I was definitely like, the first time I played it, and in the first couple of hours, I was definitely thinking to myself, like, hey, this is a very box standard shooter. I don't know how this is going to be any interesting later on down the road. But then, shit actually happens. So, you are surprised in the end. But I do not know if the gameplay played any part in that for me. I don't know if that's different for you.
I mean, like for me, the thing is that I did not grow up playing a lot of shooters. I really only got into shooters like quite late into my kind of gaming career. Mm-hmm. And so when I was playing Spec Ops The Line, I was kind of like, this is fine by the standard of other shooters that I had played before it. So that really didn't bother me. But you did, talk about how it's made to be kind of intentionally mundane to make the story that much more pronounced and that much more hard hitting. Like the story, on the other hand, I thought was, and this is a weird word to describe how gnarly of a story it is, but I feel like it was very kind of sublime in what it set out to do. I feel like it did a kind of great job at just sort of like illustrating the kind of depravity of the situation that your characters are in, and how perhaps we as gamers as a whole shouldn't take some of the kind of standards of the genre as, how should I say, like we shouldn't, we should probably consider reevaluating our whole relationship and admiration of violence in shooters and in games of its ilk.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that Spec Ops does a very good job at kind of discouraging, that mentality. Though again, I do feel like, and this is also a criticism that has been, lauded against The Line, is that the only way for you to kind of stop the story from degenerating in this way, to kind of stop the whole process of people dying all around you, is to just stop playing the game. There's never really an option to not become a war criminal at the very end of the story, and I do feel like some aspects of the story would have been more hard hitting if a choice was presented. There are a couple of moments where, for example, when Lugo was hanged by civilians. You had the option to directly open fire into the crowd that killed Lugo, but other than that, when you have the white phosphorus moment, for example, the only option is to launch the white phosphorus on the civilians. So I believe that Walt Williams actually directly mentioned that they wanted to have different story arcs or different branching narrative arcs in the game, but that time constraints prevented them from doing so. But it would have been an interesting thing.
I mean, I think it was a combination of time constraints, and unfortunately I don't have the book literally on hand, so I can't reach into it and scroll to the page in which he talks about it. But I think it is also a thing where like they just wanted it to be more hard hitting. They wanted to make sure that the messages that they wanted to convey from such a route were effectively conveyed. And I think that they feared that, if they added in the option to be a good person or a bad person, then, inevitably most people would go with the good route, and the lessons to be learned from the bad route would have never really gone out or reached kind of the mainstream. Recently, I'm sure you probably heard about this, how most people who played through the Mass Effect series played through as Paragon rather than Renegade, even though BioWare put so much work into Renegade. And it's like, even without having that evidence in front of them, I'd have to imagine that it was that Yager Development and 2K probably were like, we want to make sure that the message that we would get across in the dark playthrough of our game really gets across, and we don't know that that's not guaranteed if we give people the option to not do it.
Sure, I suppose that makes sense. Yeah, but
Yeah.
a part of me will always kind of reminisce or lament the fact that it would have been cool to have the different story, but I totally understand that there were budget constraints and time constraints like any other development timeline. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So we've kind of danced around it a lot, but let's kind of get into the ending. So you arrive at the end of the game. The entire time you're playing as this character called Walker, and you're basically trying to find this person called Conrad, who is based off of a character of the same name from Heart of Darkness, which is the novel that the movie Apocalypse Now is based off of. And basically it's revealed that, in fact, what you thought was Conrad speaking to you on a radio the whole time was actually just Walker hallucinating. And then based on that, either you end up getting killed, or you end up killing yourself, or you end up going home, or there's like a bunch of other options basically that become available to you after this point, but none of them are especially happy.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, I mean, did you see that twist coming, or was it kind of obvious at that point?
No, I always thought, because I did see the movie Apocalypse Now, and I feel like there was always going to be this moment with Conrad where he was still alive and you had the option to shoot him. But once you discover that he is just a figment of your imagination and you are presented with the option to shoot him, in a way, I suppose, you see this mirror reflection of yourself and Conrad, and there's the choice to point the gun at him, or the gun is pointed at you, and he starts counting down, and whether you do something about the countdown or not, whether you shoot him, something will happen. But no, I always thought he was going to be alive at the very end. Once he did start the countdown, though, I eventually shot him, just because I kind of knew that not shooting him will result in you killing yourself in the game. And I always go for the option that presents me with the most gameplay or narrative perspective. So I chose to let Walker live, and then I was picked up by the Marines, or the soldiers that show up at the end, and I also chose to go willingly. I didn't open fire on them, but there's a bunch of different options that ensue if you open fire or do something else. But what did you arrive at the very end?
The first, the official real ending that I arrived at for the first time was I was in the standoff with Conrad, and I let him count to 3, or maybe he counted from 3 down to 1. I don't remember. And he shot me and he killed me. So that's the ending that I got officially the first time. But after that, I was like, I'm not satisfied. And so then I went and I did the ending that you got, which, I mean, it's arguably the most happy question mark of all the possible endings you can get at the end of the game. But it also, like, as it was happening in my mind, I was like, this also feels like the least realistic.
Definitely. It is a betrayal of the character Walker in a certain way. And in a way also, I don't know if it's the best possible ending, because at the very end, I mean, Walker is forced to live with his suffering. All the things he did in Dubai will stay with him forever.
So, by the way, I want to mention, earlier you mentioned how you thought that Conrad was going to be alive when you got to him at the end of the game. Something that I discovered when I was researching the Spec Ops video that I had never realized up until this point is that, so when you start the game, you're shown a brief cutscene of Conrad in his quarters, basically, back when he was still alive. And it was pointed out in an article, I don't remember where, that, like, when you get to the end of the game, it's apparent that scene at the beginning of the game is foreshadowing that Conrad is basically, like, composing a letter or whatever and getting ready to kill himself. And that basically, like, that scene happens, and that's why when you find him at the end of the game, he's already dead.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. I haven't really paid that much attention to the intro cutscene, but I don't know. There's not really like a eureka moment for me right now, but maybe if I'll play the game again, that kind of lands on me.
I mean,
but that's an interesting detail, though. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of other weird details like that. There's this other thing where, also at the beginning of the game, there's a sequence where Conrad and company are in a helicopter and they're trying to escape Dubai, and they get shot down. And when you get to that moment later in the game, Conrad, like, basically he sort of breaks the fourth wall, and he's like, wait a minute, didn't we already experience this? And apparently that was Walt Williams's way of basically, he didn't want the game to start in media res, like he didn't want to start in the helicopter like that. And so when the decision came down from up high, it had to start in the helicopter. He had Nolan North, who voiced Walker, record some lines that basically made it so that when they get to it again, that scene again in the helicopter, he's breaking the fourth wall because, and this is Walt Williams' opinion, the entire game is basically Walt Williams hallucinating after the helicopter crash from the beginning.
Wait, Walt Williams? You mean Walker hallucinating from...
Well, Walt Williams' opinion, the writer.
Oh, I see. Definitely. Okay. Well, I suppose. I have seen a video about this video essay from a YouTuber called Racevic. I don't know if you've... So he does go into detail about this as well, where the whole helicopter sequence is meant to signify a certain figment of Walker's imagination happening. But I suppose I interpret the story very flatly, in that I choose to believe that every event in the game just kind of happens chronologically, and that there's no real mind trickery aside from the hallucinations going on. But I don't know. I'll maybe if I'll play the game like 2 or 3 times more, that things will kind of dawn on me. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much stock to put in Walt Williams's take on the opening to the game. I mean, I think that he's being genuine when you say that, but I feel like you can disregard what he says and it still totally works.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like the game very much stands its own, even if you don't really pay attention to all these little details. Another one I really liked was in the intro credits, you had all these different names of the developers, and it ends with special guest, and then it plays your name. Whether it's your PlayStation Network ID or your Steam ID, it shows your name. You are the special guest in the story, and it's a nice little fourth wall detail that I like.
Wow, that's I'm beginning to realize as we're talking about the game that there are a lot of parallels between this game and Metal Gear Solid 2. Here's the thing. I don't want to spoil them because I really want you to play the Metal Gear Solid games at some point before we eventually work on the video for that series. But yeah, there's a very distinctive point in Metal Gear Solid 2 where your name, like the name that you actually chose as like your avatar name in the game, gets brought up. Although in that case, it actually happens at the end of the game instead of the beginning.
Wasn't there also a sequence in Metal Gear Solid where you had this boss fight with Psycho Mantis, and he'll tell you what kind of games were stored on your save card in your PlayStation system? Wasn't that a thing as well?
Yeah, that's it. That's in Metal Gear Solid 1, though.
I mean, see. So it goes all the way back to the first Metal Gear Solid then.
Yeah, I mean, all of the Metal Gear Solid games have fourth wall breaking elements. But it's like Metal Gear Solid 2, I feel like tonally, like what the message of that game is trying to go for, I'd say is most in line with what Spec Ops is kind of trying to go for.
I see. Well, maybe one day when they'll get released on PC, or when we'll do the video about them, of course, I'll get to experience that myself.
We'll see. Konami is becoming ever so slightly more interested in doing so by day, but who knows when that day will arrive.
Okay, good signs though. We'll see.
Yeah. I figure that we should probably talk about this because we haven't mentioned it up until this point. But the white phosphorus scene, were you fooled when that scene happened?
In a way, yes. In my first playthrough, I didn't really expect there to be civilians. Once I fired the last shell, but then when you play it more times, you'll kind of see the cracks in the spectacle, I suppose. Yeah, I do not know what to say about that, though. I feel like it was very much straightforward, and you were led into that scene. Things happened, the Delta Squad kind of fell apart. After that, things really started to go badly for them, but I do admire Yager in what they did. Like atrocities in shooter games, you'll probably remember Call of Duty had done this before with the airport scene in Modern Warfare 2 being a very controversial thing back in the day. You're just presented with the opportunity to kind of just kill everyone without any real consequence. Well, it does bear some weight on the story. The whole conflict happens because of that moment. But in Spec Ops, it's more tangible in a way. It's more personal. You see the characters really lament the fact that this happened. So the way they did it was kind of neat, though. Like I said before, I for multiple playthroughs, I wish there was an option. But
yeah.
How do you stand in that? How did you experience like the first time that you saw that cutscene happen?
I mean, I think this might be one of the most impressive parts of the game to me, because I feel like it's very rare that a video game succeeds in tricking me into doing something. Like, I feel like almost all the time, either like I'm in complete control of whatever decision I'm currently making, or I legitimately didn't even know like what was going on, so it doesn't count. And in that case, so like the whole thing about this scene is that it's presented, the graphic that you're using to rain down white phosphorus on people is like the same kind of mini game graphic that you have in Call of Duty Modern Warfare. In fact, it was like directly kind of inspired / modeled off of it. And basically the whole point is that you are raining fire down on people, and you're thinking, oh, this is kind of like a mini game. This is like a good fun time. I'm getting some kill streaks. And then you walk through all the destruction that you wrought afterwards, and you realize like, oh shit, like I did not realize what I was going for. And the thing that's been pointed out, I just want to say quickly, is that like if you pay close attention to the map and to like the placement of people on it, the game actually indicates that you're not actually shooting at just soldiers, like enemy soldiers. Like basically the close placement of all the people on the minigame white phosphorus map indicates that actually these are civilians, because they're grouped together too closely, basically.
Definitely. You can kind of tell it was pre-planned if you really pay close attention to that. But in your first playthrough, it's easy to miss. But what I feel like Spec Ops does really well is, and what other shooters maybe don't, is Spec Ops confronts you with what you've done. All your actions are laid before you. I don't know if you've ever walked up to a group of enemies and you just kind of hide behind cover and not let them notice you. They'll actually start to talk about really personal things if you pause for a while, and they'll talk about how they miss home or what the best way to do or how you can combat the heat or that sort of stuff, like very personal things. And you really feel bad if you start the firefight, which you have to do eventually. And I feel like a lot of shooter games just kind of present these enemies as infantile AI with no real purpose other than just to be shot. And Spec Ops really presents them as human beings, and that makes it so interesting, and also a bit of a huge dilemma to eventually start killing them. But
yeah, for sure. Although I will say, in my instance, I generally didn't tend to wait a lot. I'm the kind of guy where I'll either like go full stealth, or if stealth isn't much of an option, I'll just kind of go in guns blazing. So
I understand. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Fair enough.
I did briefly want to touch up on the multiplayer component of this game, because this had a multiplayer component that was primarily developed by a studio called Darkside Game Studios. I didn't really touch it, to be all that honest, and part of the reason for that was that there were no trophies attached to it, which, like, if I'm playing a game on PlayStation sometimes and I'm looking to platinum it, I'll definitely check out the multiplayer mode if there are multiplayer trophies that I need to take care of. In this case, though, there were none, as far as I can recall, so I didn't really bother with it.
Understandable. Yeah, no, I didn't even try the multiplayer, not even on my first playthrough, because this game was released very much at the time when you had games like, let's say, Last of Us or Uncharted, where multiplayer was cool, but it kind of felt like an afterthought. And I feel like Spec Ops really belonged in that department. It needed to have the multiplayer for multiplayer's sake, and because the publishers wanted it to be there, rather than it being a substantial addition to the overall gameplay experience. So
yeah, I mean, I feel a little bit bad because when you talk about like multiplayer modes needing to be there, the one game that comes to mind is BioShock 2. I feel like coming off of the original BioShock, I don't think a single person said there needs to be like a multiplayer mode for this game, but they had one in BioShock 2, and you know what? I played it because there were trophies attached to it, and it honestly wasn't that bad. Like, there was actually some pretty fun moments in it, and I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, Spec Ops: The Line's multiplayer mode is actually like kind of fun, but I don't think there's a chance I would ever go back to it at this point.
No, you can definitely make the argument that the forced inclusion of multiplayer components is a bit problematic, in that the multiplayer components to games that have actually been paid attention to will be overlooked as a result. So I understand that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I feel like we talked about all there is to really kind of talk about. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
In terms of a sequel, where do you see the Spec Ops franchise ever going, if anything?
Yeah, it's a good point. I wrote that down ahead of this, and I'd completely kind of forgotten that. I mean,
no problem.
I mean, I just can't.
It's our first time in this series, right?
Right, so and we're still figuring it out. We're still kind of wading into the waters. So
exactly.
I mean, I think I stand with a lot of other people when I say that I would rather there not be a sequel. You know, I don't know how you even can follow this up with a sequel. I'd be curious, like, if one day 2K came out and they announced, hey, we're making another Spec Ops game, but it's going to be just kind of like a standard shooter, like the way the series was before The Line. But I wonder if they could even pull off a stunt like that.
I don't think they will. And if anything, what 2K has proven in the past, though, is that they, for some reason, really do want to pay attention to games that kind of go above and beyond the call, you know, BioShock being an obvious example. And let's not forget that Spec Ops: The Line only became the way it did because of 2K's involvement, right? Because of them kind of pushing down the whole Heart of Darkness narrative onto the game. So if a sequel was ever developed, I think 2K would need to have a special incentive to do so. And I feel like that special incentive could very much be, or very well be, another anti-war message, or you know, something in a similar vein. But I would definitely like to see more games of this sort, and if that has to be Spec Ops 2, and if they have a interesting gameplay or narrative concept with that, I'm all aboard, definitely.
Yeah, I guess the only question that remains now is, like, who would develop it? Because Yager Development was very apparent about the fact that they did not want to make games as, you know, grisly and dark as Spec Ops anymore. They want to move on to more lighthearted fare. And I don't know who within 2K's stable of developers right now is like, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, I suppose the Mafia developers would be the closest thing you can get to a third-person shooter developer who's kind of familiar with telling decent, if not very good stories. I don't know if you've played Mafia 3, but apparently that had a very strong story as well. So I feel like those guys would be a good candidate in that regard. But yeah, I see your dilemma. But I mean, 2K is not short on funds, though. If they need to make Spec Ops 2 happen, I'm sure they can find the resources to do so.
Yeah, for sure. But obviously, you'd have to imagine that they would also want to hand it off to a development studio that's, really, how should I say? Like that has,
Proven?
yeah, exactly. Proven has a good pedigree as well.
Yeah, although you can make the argument that Yager wasn't proven until they were
That's a
handed
good
the
point.
license.
That is a good
So
point.
yeah, maybe they'll recruit a new developer, a new Yager to make the game.
Maybe maybe we should start up a development studio called Yager Development 2.
Or Yager, but with a V instead of an A.
Ah, there we go. And with that, we've reached the end of this first episode of this new show that we're currently in the process of incubating and getting off the ground. I'm Alexander Kazina. You can follow me offline, or rather online, but off of this channel on Twitter at Alex Kazina, AlexKozina. Eilert?
And my name's been Ailert, and you can find me on twitter.com/theeilert. And also, do not forget to check out our main channel, and also not forget to check out the Spec Ops The Line video that is featured on there if you haven't already. If you'd like to support us directly, you can find us on patreon.com/gamers with a V instead of an A. And I believe that's everything.
Yep. Goodbye.
Goodbye.